All right. So today we're going to talk about typographic anatomy and learning the lexicon. So the first thing we're going to learn is that all letters sit on a baseline. So here's an example. The blue line is the baseline. All letters sit on a baseline. But what we're going to learn is they sit on it differently. Here's a median line. That's going to give us the space between the baseline and the top of the lowercase letters. And then the space between those two lines is called the X height. So you have a baseline that our letter forms are sitting on, the median line, which is the top of the lowercase letters, and that space between is the X height. So something else I want you to notice. What else is happening here? Look how the letters are sitting between these two lines. What's happening?
The curves of the C and the O are going slightly above and slightly below the baseline and the median line.
Yeah, do you think that's a mistake? Why do you think that's happening? Any ideas? Why would our C's and our curves go above and below our baseline that everything's supposed to sit on? Well, what it is this is called overshoot. And the reason we need overshoot is that if we made the rounded letters the exact same height as their neighbors here that have these nice hefty slab serifs here, they would feel smaller. Chew, chew. Excuse me. They
Bless
would
you.
feel smaller. Thank you.
Bless you.
Thank you guys. I'm sorry. I should have muted myself. I get seasonal allergies, so apologies. I did take my allergy pill.
That was a cute little sneeze. Don't apologize.
So yeah, so this is called overshoot. So overshoot is why optically, when we're looking at a letter, if we made it squished and smaller in between these two lines, it would feel smaller than the rest of the letters. So in order for our eye to read it as the same height as all the other letters, we have to have more of that color, the black, the color of the letter along that line. And so the color has to extend beyond it. So what we call that is overshoot. And that's important to always have your rounded letters overshoot. And they're designed to do that. So you'll notice this when you start working with type, that this is how they're designed. Okay, and then we have cap height. There's a cap height line. Now you might be noticing how all of the cap heights and the X height are different. Well, that's because every typeface it's not a standard height from the baseline to the cap height or to the X height. That's not how type is measured. It's not measured vertically. It's measured in M's, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But I want you to be aware that it seems that when you think about a typeface, like let's say it's 72 points, that the way everything else is measured, it's usually from, floor to ceiling. That's how we measure. But that's not how we measure type. And so even though I might be using 72, these all three are the same point size, 72 points, they are not all the same height. The X height is different and the cap height is different, but they yet are still the same point size. And we're going to get into that because of the way they're measured. So we have here, I gotta move my Zoom thing. We measure in two different ways within typographic design. We measure with picas and points. You're already aware that we work with points because all your software is set up that way. You know that when you say, I'm going to have 6-point type, 8-point type, 10 point, 11, 12, it's not 1-inch type. It's not 2-inch type. It's not 1.25-inch type, right? It's points because that's how your software is all laid out. So you've all seen that, whether you're using Word, just data processing software, or any of our design programs, it's always in points. So points are how we measure type. It's also how we measure paragraph indents, lines, and letter spacing. Everything of that nature is measured in points. Picas are generally used to measure page elements like column widths and page margins. And that really is how we were using it when we were using picas pretty regularly when we were working in typesetting traditionally, where it was photocopied and people were cutting up and cutting, pasting, putting pages together when we were using movable type. This on the left here, this little block on the left with the H on it, is a piece of movable type. That was the first printing press that Johann Gutenberg used. This is how the type was. The metal type is attached to a wooden block. And so the height that we're measuring from, as I said, does not go from baseline to cap height. It actually goes from descender to ascender. And so the height of a letter is descender to ascender. And so this dotted red line here is how we measure type. And it was based back on the movable type, the length of the blocks, because all the blocks would have to be the same size. And so that's how type is measured. And so it's called an M measurement. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Here we can kind of see some of the differences. I think at this point you're pretty familiar with sans serif type and serif type. Sans serif ends bluntly at the base, and a serif has these little like decorative edges that come off the edge of the letter forms. Those are serifs. We call them serifs, and it kind of identifies the two types of, either you have a sans serif or a serif. Those are the two categories that are kind of like the basic. Everything that's in red here is referring to a stroke. We identify the letter, the letter forms are just, when they're being drawn, they're called strokes. And it's any line that defines the basic letter form. Here is a serif, which is those small elements that are added to the ends of the main strokes of a letter. This is a bracket. The bracket is the transition between the serif and the stem. Here's our descender. So we're bringing that line down, and we have a descender line. It's a stroke on a lowercase letter form that falls below the baseline. And then equally, we have an ascender. And that's a stroke on a lowercase letter that rises above the median or the X height. At any point, if anyone has any questions, don't feel free to ask. I'm just going to kind of go through these. We're going to review them again. I just want to kind of run through them. But if you have any questions as we're going, don't feel free to raise your hand or turn your mic on. Either is fine. Here's a bowl. A bowl is a curved stroke enclosing the counter form of a letter. The center part of a negative space inside a letter is, it can be fully or partially enclosed, and it's called a counter. So what letters have counters? Who can tell me?
Letter O.
That's
letter
right.
O.
The letter O. Who else?
P,
What, uppercase or lowercase?
lowercase.
Technically it does, but we actually have a different name for it. We're going to get to that in a minute. So actually the answer is no. You wouldn't call it a counter because it has its own special name, just to make it more complicated. I know. Crazy. So any other letters?
Would a letter like an N or a U count since it's like partially enclosed?
That's right. Just like it says on the description here, it can be fully or partially enclosed. So our N's here, these are counters. That's a counter. The D is a counter and the N is a counter.
What letter did Sandra say again that wasn't technically a counter?
The space inside the lowercase e.
Oh, an E. Okay.
Oh
Yeah.
no, I said P as in Peter.
Oh, I thought you said E.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. No, it was P.
P is a counter. Yes, you're right, Sandra.
Okay.
P is a counter. E is not. Ding, ding, ding. Yes, P. Perfect. All right, let's keep going. All right. The vertical strokes or diagonal strokes in the letter form are called a stem. This is a ligature. It's basically where we've taken, we talked about this a little bit last class. We take two or more characters linked together as one unit. For example, the F and the I linked together where the finial of the F becomes the tittle of the I. And that makes it a ligature. Finial. The rounded non-serif terminal to a stroke. And then there's a terminal, is the self-contained finish of a stroke without a serif. These two terms are used interchangeably. So you can use either finial or terminal in this case. Tail, the curved or diagonal stroke at the finish of certain terminals is called a tail. Cross stroke, the horizontal stroke that intersects the stem is a cross stroke. The key term here is intersecting the stem. So it means it goes through left to right. So a lowercase t, a lowercase f are cross strokes. Spur is the extension that articulates the meeting of a curved and rectilinear stroke. So where your curve meets your stem, okay? Where your curve meets your stem, this space here is a spur. Think of it like a cowboy boot spur. Shoulder is a curved stroke that's not a bowl. What you're going to notice is there's a lot of terminology that is based on the human form. We talked about the humanist qualities that were designed when they were starting to create letter typefaces. So a lot of the terminology is, as you're seeing, going to start feeling like body parts. So we have our shoulder. So an M and an N both have shoulders. Continuing with our body parts, the G, the lowercase g, has an ear, a stroke extending out from the main stem or body of the letter form. So a lowercase g.
Not all G's have ears though, right? It's just this G.
Just this stacked G has an ear. You're right. A more traditional G that comes down and over it does not have an ear. So only if it has, and it's also the only letter that has an ear. The only letter that has an ear is a G, and it's only this style G.
I'm sorry, why isn't the little bit of the N that's sticking out there called an ear? The
The stem,
Is that what, okay, sorry.
this is the stem, but yeah, it goes all the way up. So from the top to the bottom is the stem. So yeah, but notice how this is coming out horizontally. Like it's just kind of like bleak coming out horizontally. So it's not, this is along the stem. So that's all part of the same unit.
So the letters that have like what we're calling brackets, where instead of just straight up and down, there's like those little curves at the top and the bottom. What is there a name for like the part of the N where instead of just going straight up, it like curves out and it has a little moment? I don't know how to.
Well, this is a serif. So this is still part of a serif. Even though it's on an angle, this can still be a serif.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And these guys here on our uppercase letters are called arms. So we're keeping with our body parts. This is our arm. Short strokes off the letter form, either horizontal or inclined upward. So they have to be on the top half of the letter form. They're called arms. What other letter here on this display has an arm that isn't indicated?
The A.
Nope,
Wait,
The E.
the E. This top one of the E has an arm. Okay. Let's go down here on this part of the E. And it also has a leg. So short strokes off the letter form, either at the bottom or inclined downward, has a leg. So an E and the L have legs. Would the middle, oh, good question, Candy. Would the middle part of the E be a leg too? Yes, we would refer to that middle piece or the E and the F also as a leg.
why not an arm? 'Cause it's
You
the
could go
middle.
either way. I think you can go either way, but I think we would most likely go leg over arm. The crossbar is a horizontal stroke that joins two stems. So the crossbar connects two stems. So an A is connecting two stems. The crossbar is connecting the two pieces. Whereas the E and the F, especially when we're talking lower, is the cross stroke. Because it's not connecting. And actually, I take it back. We wouldn't call these legs. I don't know. I think I'm not having enough caffeine today. These would actually be cross strokes. So the E and the F, the middle ones would be your cross stroke. They're not connecting, but they're just connecting, going through off one side. It's a stroke, and it's a crossbar when it's connecting to.
So a cross stroke doesn't necessarily have to go straight through the letter like the T. It can
Right.
go up to just one side in the middle.
It can go off to just one side, and it can cross across, but it doesn't connect. The stroke doesn't connect, the bar connects. Okay, so the A and the V are two diagonal letters that have these peaks and valleys, if you will. So the way to remember what these are is the peak is the apex and the valley is the vertex. So the point created by joining two diagonal stems, apex is above and vertex is below. And I like to think of it as peak and valley, valley for vertex and peak for apex, because you're climbing a mountain or you're going down in the valley. So that's how we refer to those two. And the space between the two diagonal letters in a V is called a crotch, interior space where two strokes meet. Then we have something that we call a stress. And a stress is the gradual variation of the thickness of a curved character part or stroke. So you can see it's looking at the thinnest part on the letter O. So for example, this letter O is the thinnest point of the letter O is on a diagonal. This is an old style O. That means the stroke is on a diagonal. This version, and this is kind of like our Didot, Bodoni, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the other name. It'll come back to me in a minute. These are going straight up and down. That's a modern classification of a typeface. So this is kind of along that line. And here you have the same modern classification because it's going vertical. The thinnest point is vertical, straight up and down. Now here's an example of a geometric sans. And a geometric sans means it's based on geometry and there is no thick to thin. The stroke is completely even all the way around. That means it has no stress, no stress. And then over here, you have another one that's stress. So it can be much more exaggerated like these first two, or it could be a little bit more subtle like this very last one. It's more of a transitional sans. Think of like a Helvetica. Okay, so you've heard me mention a little bit about classifications. Let's go
I
through
have one more
this.
question.
Oh yeah, go
Sorry,
right ahead.
question. In the letter W, does it have two crotches or two counters?
Crotches, because it's where two
Okay.
two angles meet.
Even if it's like a curly W?
If it's a curly W, then it would be a counter. If it's a vertical harsh V, it would be a crotch. So you're right. Depending on the typeface, you would
Okay.
refer to it differently. That's a good point. So classifications are like the little buckets we put type in. And I'm going to go over like the top, I think there's 5 I have here. I think it's 5 or 6. And so let me look here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I have 5. So the 5 are the buckets we're going to put them in. This is just kind of a high level organization of classifications. There are books the size of dictionaries about classifications. This could be a semester long course of how to classify typography. That's how deep this can go, the subject of classification. We're going to stay to a really high level of it based on that this is more of an introduction course. So I want you to know that even though you're going to learn like these top 5 areas of classification, there are many, many more. And when you get out into industry, you might hear about many, many more because it goes beyond what I'm going to show you today. So let's start with one of the first ones, Garamond, right? Garamond 1475. This is an old style typography, typeface. You can see that it's based on calligraphy. You can see that there's this very curved, accented apex. You can see there's a curve in the serifs, both underneath and around the bracket. They're influenced by carved Roman capitals. Remember, we had Trajan, the Trajan column. It emulates calligraphy. The stress is at an angle, like you would do if you were writing calligraphy by hand. We have bracketed serifs, and it's very human-like, right? It has a very human touch about it. Modern, here's an example of Bodoni, designed in 1798, has extreme contrast between thick and thin strokes. It's much more mechanical, less calligraphic. The serifs are unbracketed. What that means is when we look here and see the serif, there's no curve. There's no little softening between the stem and the serif. It just goes straight down one into the other. So that means it's unbracketed. The weight of the stress is rounded characters, is vertical. It's thin, it has straight serifs. Oh, I see a question. Do all the terms explained before apply to both serif and sans serif typefaces? Yes, yes, they do. Good question. Okay, Egyptian, also known as slab serifs. Designed, here's Clarendon, which was designed in 1845. Heavy, square or rectangular serifs. Remember, this was the monster fonts. This is when we moved into billboards and the need for getting them up on billboards and big typefaces. Some have strokes that are the same weight, and some are unbracketed and some are bracketed. So there's not a one way for the Egyptian. It could be either or. Because remember, these serifs become really decorative in Egyptian and slab serif. Okay. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Just going back just to make sure I'm understanding this. For the Egyptian one.
Let's go back. Yep.
When it says strokes, minimal stress of curved strokes, Does that mean like minimal line variation in curves, like line width variation?
Right. So let me go back to this picture. So the minimal stress is this one right here. So
Okay.
you see how there's the difference in the thickness is very minimal.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. It's a good question. Thank you. And so geometric has no stress. And I'm going to go back just since we're talking stress. That's this guy right here. This is the geometric. No stress, no change in thick to thin. The O's are perfect circles. The A and M have sharp peaks. It's very geometric, very rhythmic. And Futura was designed in 1927. It's also the first typeface that landed on the moon. The actual moon landing sign is set in Futura. Fun fact. Transitional SAMs, no serifs. Anonymous, neutral, rational, uniform stroke. Stress is almost always vertical. Designed in 1954. All right, so that's kind of our overview of like the top 5, if you will, categories. And again, that's not to say there's not a whole bunch more, but it's the ones we're going to kind of go over, and that's how we're going to refer. When we talk about categories in our designs, when we talk about categories, this is the way we're going, the buckets we're going to put them in. All right. Let me stop sharing and